Hi, my name's Ed Nolan. I'm a psychology teacher at Queen Elizabeth Sixth Form College, and for today's lesson we are going to be looking at one social psychological explanation of schizophrenia, which is the dysfunctional families. By the end of this session, we should be able to describe how dysfunctional families lead to schizophrenia, and we're looking at two different particular ideas within dysfunctional families. One is an expressed emotion environment, the other is double-bind communications. So you should be able to describe those ideas, those theories. You should also be able to use one study to describe that, and we'll look at that today. And you should be able to apply those in answering a question, and we'll talk to you about how to do that. So the first question I want you to think about now is, well, what is social psychology? Sometimes we get our theories mixed up. Is it in individual differences? Is it social psychology? Well, what is social psychology? Don't have a little think if you think you know the idea. Well, a definition from a dictionary is this idea that it is a branch of psychology that deals with social interactions. It deals with what we do with other people, but also how other people influence our social interactions as well. So when we're looking at this, social psychological expressions look at how schizophrenia is a result of other people, what other people have been doing, the interactions with those other people. Now, of course, if you're looking at other people, you are looking at your family as one of the primary groups. Okay, what I want you to do now is I want you to press pause on the video and then have a look at these activities. Okay, hopefully now you have read through, you've got some knowledge of information and you know the key terms. So what we're going to do is build on that and go over those, hopefully so you understand them a bit more clearly. Right, so social psychology explanations. We have two explanations that we're going to look at. The first one is the video for today, which is dysfunctional families, which is our 10 marker. And then the 5 marker, so the one that you have to write half an essay on. So if you get a question asking for 2 social psychology explanations, you can refer back to this one, is socio-cultural factors, and you will be looking at that next week. So for our dysfunctional families, we're going to look at 2 ideas of expressed emotion double-bind theory. Now, because you've looked at the definitions, you've had a read, you should have an idea now of what that's all about. But the social cultural factors is we're going to look at ethnicity, discrimination, and the stress surrounded by that, and the stress of urban living. Both have been linked to higher levels of schizophrenia, and that's for another lesson. Very interesting stuff. Right, dysfunctional families. Let's have a look at those. I love this picture. It's really funny, though I'm not quite sure why she has a love heart on her finger. I'm assuming that's a ring that's going on there. Okay, so as I said earlier, you need to know one theory to write a whole essay on, and that's the 10 marker theory. So you really should be able to write 3 or 4 paragraphs describing this theory, giving yourself enough information. And then we have the 5 marker, which is half the essay. But you should also be able to cut this down, and you'll do that by not including the research evidence. For a short answer, if it asks for 2 explanations. So you should be able to write less about dysfunctional families and then be able to write about the other social factors. Right. So, description. What have you got to do? So for 10 marks, really you should be able to give a broad overview and describing 2 aspects of dysfunctional families, where we've looked at that as the expressed emotion and the double-bind communication. You can just do one of them, but if you just do one of them, you're really looking at a maximum mark of a C if you do it very well. If you're like, look, there's just too much to learn, I'll just do the one. Well, that's fine, but obviously that's going to influence your grade. You're not going to be able to get your breadth of description for the higher marks. But what is key, what is really key, is this aspect here, is linking your explanations to the symptoms of schizophrenia. That is key. Quite often a mistake that students make is that they just describe the theory and just ignore schizophrenia altogether. That needs to be in there in order for you to access the marks. Right, so let's give you an overview of dysfunctional families. Let's see if I can get this right. Right, okay. So we're looking at this idea that somehow within the family, some negative environments, some negative communications within the family can lead on to the effect that lead on to schizophrenia. Now this might be that it creates a vulnerability to getting showing symptoms of schizophrenia, or what we will certainly be looking at is that someone who has schizophrenia, it makes it worse. They relapse back into those symptoms once they've got them. Okay, so we are looking at this idea, does dysfunctional families cause schizophrenia? Well, it is part of that influence that brings it on. I don't think any social psychologist would say that it's the sole cause. Okay, so expressed emotion. Remember we talked about there are two aspects that we need to look at: expressed emotion, double bind communication. Expressed emotion probably is the most credible of the two. I know if we look on a historical line, this is probably later than double bind, and it's less kind of psychodynamic influence, but it is probably the most useful of the two aspects of dysfunctional families. So it was developed by a British psychiatrist actually called George Brown. In the 1950s, 60s, as they came to look at families change from a psychodynamic viewpoint, and he was one of them. Now, one thing you need to know is that expressed emotion has been linked to a number of mental health issues. And so we know that what's called a high expressed emotion environment is linked to anxiety disorders. It's also linked to depression. It's linked to other disorders as well. But George Brown really piloted it looking at schizophrenia. And what he did is he just interviewed schizophrenics. He interviewed them and their families, and he made some observations about how they interacted with their families and what was going on there. So he interviewed them and came back 9 months and interviewed them again. What he found was that those in those families that there was kind of adverse environments, negative environments, critical environments. And it was his idea that actually it was this environment that was triggering off the schizophrenia. So just a reminder that you've got to do two explanations: the expressed emotion and the double bind communication. So the question is, well, what is an expressed emotion environment? Remember, if you have a high expressed emotion environment, you will show these characteristics that I've got on the screen here. A low one means an absence of them, a much more positive environment. So what we have here is very critical, very hostile, not warm, not kind of endearing, no support really there. But this idea of this emotional over-involvement going on here, that there's a lot of baggage happening in these environments. Okay, and so if it contains this is a high EE rather than a low. The low's the opposite. Okay, let's take a look at now what we mean by some of these. Here. So what I would like you to do is have a look through these kind of ideas. So critical comments, yes, often from parents. The same with the hostility, this kind of rejection that's going on, a lack of warmth, positive regard, meaning people, when you have positive regard for something, it means you respond positively to them, you listen to what they've got to say, you appreciate them being there. Okay, and this emotional over-involvement and this idea of blaming, the parent blaming themselves about what their son or daughter's going through. Their sadness, sometimes in emotional over-involvement, they will say, well, this makes me so sad, really putting on an emotional baggage onto the sufferer. Okay, what might be a good idea is if you press pause now, have a look at those, get a bit of paper out, turn the screen off or move away from screen. See how much you can describe. You won't need to describe in detail all of these, but what you certainly need to know is the 4 main points. Okay, so we have now an understanding that if you have a high expressed emotion, it's very negative environment, low is very positive, and the question is, how does that link to schizophrenia? Well, what they do is they create stress and anxiety. Now, if you think about, when does schizophrenia usually occur? It usually occurs in males in their late teens and early 20s, and for females in their early 20s. Now, you think about, when is the most stressful part of life? Unfortunately, guys, you're in it. Late teens, early 20s, very stressful, all kinds of stuff going on, lots of pressures of learning, relationships, what are you going to do with your future, who am I, what kind of person am I, what kind of hormones, all kinds of stuff going through, parents maybe going through menopause. Anyway, let's move on. So all this kind of happening on there, so it's quite stressful. So if you have a vulnerability because you're anxious because of this environment, and then you come into the stressful point in your life, you then struggle. You haven't got the coping mechanisms to deal with that. And because the coping mechanisms aren't there, then things tend to fall apart. Okay, now you can see why this has been linked to lots of mental health issues, but one of them is schizophrenia. Yeah. So suddenly you may become delusional, you may become paranoid, you may worry a lot about things, or you may become withdrawn and show negative symptoms of schizophrenia. Now, our second idea, let's put some research evidence in there. So who's our research study? Now remember, research studies can be used for AO3, which is evaluation, but this is for AO1, which is description. Is just to give you breadth of description, give you a little bit more in there. So Vaughan and Leff is a piece of research we looked at. It's an interview study, 69 schizophrenics. What they did is they looked at schizophrenics who had successful treatments, and what they wanted to know is, will they relapse? Will they go back into schizophrenia? This is where most of the researchers looked at, because the reality is where, when we're looking at expressed emotion, is that really the sole cause? Well, no, there is no sole cause. But will this have an impact on dealing with schizophrenics? Most definitely. Okay, so they interviewed them, and what they found is that 53% of those from a high EE family, where this are very hostile, okay, relapsed. They went back into the schizophrenia. But was when they compared to those from more supportive environments, only 12% did. Okay, so this is significant. This is statistically significant. This shows that there is a significant difference in whether you relapse back into schizophrenia if you are in a high EE family environment compared to a low EE. This surely shows that it must play a part somehow in the occurrence of schizophrenia. Now let's look at our second part to our dysfunctional families theory, and this is here with a Californian psychoanalytic psychologist. He started off at Gregory Bateson. So Gregory Bateson looked slightly different area. He looked at childhood, particularly about how parents communicated with their child, and he came up with this idea that there is a double bind communication. Okay, and so his idea is that as parents communicate with children, they have to be very clear as to what those communications are. If they are not, if they give contradictory messages, that creates a problem. So a double bind communication is where one thing is being expressed, but there is also another that could be the case, and so the child has to bind to both of them, and that conflicts. Let me give you an example here. So as a mother tells her that she loves a child, that is a very positive message there, but if her body language is turning away in disgust, or she seems angry or aggressive, the child then has two messages. My mother does not like me, does not want me, but my mother is saying that she does, and she's accepting. Those two things are very different. And so with these communications, the child is unable to respond. They're like, well, one invalidates the other. She neither hates me or loves me. Which way is it going to go? So according to Bateson, and I think this is really important, this part here, that child is unable to construct a coherent aspect of reality. What is real? I can't build what is real and what not is real because I keep getting contradictory messages. Well, that's fine as the child grows up, but when the child becomes an adult, when life becomes different, where once again, we've talked about this, it becomes stressful, decisions are making, you now have to talk about kind of interactions with other people. Suddenly, this inability to construct what is reality plays a part. So suddenly, we then experience things that are not real and think they are real. If we are schizophrenic, that is, not me. Well, not yet. I don't think so. So anyway, but the schizophrenic will then start to believe things that are not real, kind of paranoia, delusions. Okay, or may become more withdrawn again. Negative symptoms become withdrawn again because they're not actually sure what is going on. So what's the research evidence? Well, our research evidence is Burger. No, let's try Burger. That's a Freudian slip. Maybe I'm a bit hungry. Now, this is a retrospective study. A retrospective study means that they have the schizophrenics, they have become schizophrenics, and retrospective means to look back. So they then ask the schizophrenics what has happened in their past. So obviously they gave the schizophrenics a questionnaire with lots of statements saying, did this occur to you when you were younger? Now they compared that to a control of students. And they wanted to know how often those things happen. Well, they found that the 20 schizophrenics showed higher levels of double-blind communications than 40 students. Now, there are a whole host of problems with this research, and we'll look at that in the video on AO3 next, the evaluation. But this research does suggest that schizophrenics are more likely to experience double-blind communications than non-schizophrenics, therefore supporting the theory. So, what have we looked at? We've given you a broad introduction on dysfunctional families. The idea that somehow with a dysfunctional family, it's the way that they communicate and the emotional warmth that they show, that this somehow has an impact on an individual, that they may have the occurrence of schizophrenia, that they may experience schizophrenia, or at least that they relapse back into the schizophrenia. We've looked at the idea of expressed emotion with Brown, and we've looked at Bateson's double-blind communications, two ways in which families may influence somebody and that may lead to the onset of schizophrenia. Now let's have a look at an exam question and how we can answer an exam question on this, an AO1 question on describing one social psychological explanation. So what we're going to do is I'm going to run through a kind of plan for this, then I'm going to get you to pause it, we're going to get you to do it, and then we're going to have a look at how that compared to a model answer. Okay, so what could you put in this answer? Well, first of all, you really do need to have a broad introduction about the family explanation of schizophrenia and the idea that families influence or family environment influences the occurrence, particularly with relapse. Okay, now look at express emotion. You need to put a name in there. You certainly need to put Brown's name in there, and you need to explain what it is and then link it. Now remember our 4 different aspects of an EE environment. You might want to put those in, but you don't really need to put all of the different elements to that, as long as you have a nice explanation that the reader can gain what a high EE environment is. Then we can look at the double-blind communication. That should be quicker. There's less involved in that. Don't forget, we need Bateson's name in there. And then what's really important is you put an example. You clearly show what a double-blind communication is. Okay, then link back to the symptoms. There's not a clear link to specific symptoms, but you just need to link back to the symptoms. Okay, right. What I'd like you to do is have a look at your notes now. Think about what's in the booklet. Think about what I have said, and we would like you then to turn to page 16 and 17 in your exam pack. and write an answer. Just have a go at writing an answer. Remember, it should be 3 paragraphs really, the introduction, EE, double bind, put as much information as you can put in the studies. So if you press pause and have a go at that, that will be great. Okay, let's have a look now at a model answer. So what I would like you to do is have a look at your answer. It doesn't have to be the same as this answer, but as you can see in here, we have names, we have technical terms, we even have the research, which you do, you know, that's there just to bolster it up and give you more breadth. If you don't put the research in, that's great. You might not have enough detail for AA star, but you'll still get a very good mark. There's clear kind of reference to EE and the different aspects and how it links to schizophrenia. The same with the double bind communication. How did you do? Yeah? Tick off, see where you've got. Write some ideas now on how you could improve your answer. Right, I've got a real treat for you next. So we have finished the video, but I do have a psychology joke. Okay, so 3 Freudians go into the bar. The bartender says, "I'm going to have to see your ID." Hey! Right, thank you very much.